This was news that broke just before the show went live. There was reporting that this was going to happen today, last night, but today it did happen. Biden signs executive order shutting down southern border. He has faced political pressure as migrants have continued to arrive at the U.S.-Mexico border. So, facing mounting political pressure over the migrant influx at the U.S. southern border, President Joe Biden on Tuesday signed an executive order that will temporarily shut down asylum requests once the average number of daily encounters tops 2,500 between official ports of entry, according to a senior administration official. So it's not exactly shutting down the border. That was the headline. This was the only major publication that went to print with this in enough time for me to get this article together for the show today. So there's the sort of qualification there. The shutdown would go into effect immediately since that threshold has already been met, a senior administration official said. The border would reopen only once that number falls to 1,500. The president's order would come under the Immigration and Nationality Act sections 212F and 215A, suspending entry of non-citizens who cross the southern border into the United States unlawfully. Senior administration officials said Tuesday in a call with reporters that individuals who cross the southern border unlawfully or without authorization will generally be ineligible for asylum absent exceptionally compelling circumstances unless they are accepted by the proclamation. The officials said that migrants who don't meet the requirement of having a, quote, credible fear when they apply for asylum will be immediately removable, and they, quote, anticipate that we will be removing those individuals in a matter of days, if not hours. The White House conveyed details of the long-awaited move to lawmakers on Monday, but confirmed details of the executive order Tuesday morning ahead of planned remarks by the president in the East Room of the White House, alongside mayors from several border towns. For all we know, that's happening right now. It's definitely a step in the right direction, said Texas Representative Eddie Morales Jr., whose district includes Eagle Pass, Texas, one of a number of steps that are necessary for us to be able to secure the border. In 2018, the Trump administration tried to enact similar border restrictions, but courts blocked them. The Biden administration now expects to defend the executive order against legal challenges. The executive order will also have some exceptions, including for unaccompanied children. Republican lawmakers are slamming the move as too little, too late. Biden created a crisis at the border intentionally, said Senator Kevin Cramer, Republican from North Dakota. The executive action has more political risk than benefit, particularly because his own base is going to reject it. And this came in so late that I didn't get to add this to the slideshow. But I do have a tweet on my phone from the ACLU that I will read. Breaking, the Biden administration just announced an executive order that will severely restrict people's legal right to seek asylum, putting tens of thousands of lives at risk. This action takes the same approach as the Trump administration's asylum ban. We will be challenging this order in court. So even the very partisan ACLU is going to basically sue Biden over this. So yes, this is going to be unpopular with the base. The executive action comes on the heels of a historic presidential election in Mexico, and just as the campaign in the U.S. ramps up. Trump has a 30-point edge with registered voters on the question of which candidate would handle immigration and border security better, including a 23-point edge among Latino voters, according to a late March CNBC national poll. We have some more current polling on that we'll show you in just a moment. Many immigrant advocates are furious at the president's harsher immigration policies and argue the changes will cause chaos. It is a betrayal of what we were told in this campaign 4 years ago, said Lindsay Tazalowski, the executive director for the California-based Immigrant Defenders Law Center. We were told that President Biden would be restoring humanity at our border, but what we are seeing is that history is repeating itself. So I want to go here to Mike Johnson. Here he is giving the Republican response to this.
126 days ago today that Joe Biden said, quote, "I've done all I can do." He was asked about why he wouldn't use his extensive executive authority to address the border catastrophe that he himself created. And 126 days ago, he looked into the cameras and said, I'm out of options. I've done all I can do. He tried to convince us all for all this time that there was no way he could possibly fix the mess. Remember that he engineered it. When Congressman Siscomani said a few moments ago, he began this on the day he took office over 3.5 years ago. He walked into the Oval Office and he started issuing executive orders, dozens of them. We counted 64 specific executive actions that President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas took to open that border wide. They did it intentionally. They engineered the open border. There's no question about it. The evidence is so clear.
Okay, so like I said, this is so late breaking. I didn't have the time to look into where he got that 64 number from, but I know he did roll back some of Trump's policies when he got in via the executive order pen, and then tried to say that he needed a law passed through Congress in order to take any action on the border past that point. And Mike Johnson makes the point there that he ended up acting with his executive order pen anyway, despite insisting that he needed Congress to act earlier this year. Now, here's a tweet with a video. Voters trust Trump on border security by a 27-point margin. Look at the dramatic shift on this issue from 2020.
This is a better job on border security and immigration, which tends to be one of former President Trump's best questions. But I think the key thing here, Kate, to look at is the timeline and look at the trend line here. Because back in June of 2020, Biden was actually trusted more on the question of border security and immigration by a single point. Look at where we are in May of 2024. My goodness gracious. Look at this huge jump that Donald Trump has gotten. He is now ahead on this issue by 27 percentage points. So it's not just that immigration is more at the top of voters' minds than it was 4 years ago. It's that who they trust on the issue has changed tremendously. I look at a lot of questions. I dig into the crosstabs a lot. The fact that you see a 30-point shift, I'm used to seeing 10, 15, maybe 20-point shifts, but basically a 30-point shift, 28 points if you want to be exact, that is very, very different from a lot of other polling questions.
I mean, that's just absolutely massive. And, you know, we mentioned in the last segment how the Trump verdict is going to move the polls at the margins, which I think it will. But this is the kind of big macro issue, the way Roe v. Wade was in the midterms and might be this cycle as well, for all we know. But this is the kind of macro issue where you see a massive sea change from basically tied on the issue of who can handle the border best to now a 27-point edge for Trump. Not only is it a 27-point edge for Trump, but this issue consistently ranks first or second on voters' list of concerns going into November. Inflation and the border, those are number 1 and 2, almost no matter who you ask. And so that is why he took this executive action. And like the article says, you know, is this a political win for Joe Biden? Not really, because it's going to hurt him a lot with his base. And it's not going to satisfy the hardliners like Mike Johnson and Trump, you know. So this is just an act of political desperation, I would say.
Yeah, it's a desperate move because a lot of Latinos actually want border enforcement. They've mostly already gone over to Trump. You're not going to out Trump on that issue. They're not going to say, oh, well, you know what? I guess the Democrats are really changing course. It's going to be seen as what it is. It's a political ploy. Nobody would really trust Joe Biden once he's clear of the election to maintain that kind of policy if these are the kinds of policies that you want. And as we know, there is a good portion of the base of the Democratic Party that see a policy like this as a betrayal. So overall, he's between a rock and a hard place, but he was probably better off politically not doing this. Although there's no solution for him. He's on the because you're talking about a national election. You're not talking about a primary election here. The public at large wants this kind of control over the border. Overall, the public at large. Within the Democratic Party, everyone in the country that doesn't is voting Democrat. Yeah. So what does this do for you?
Yeah. No, you're just kind of chasing it at this point. And I, just to drive home how toxic an issue this is for Biden. People like to say, well, legal immigrants want the border controlled. In my experience, illegal immigrants want the border controlled. Even the illegal. I know a guy, a friend of mine, his family came here When he was a kid, they cut through a fence. They snuck across the border, and he grew up here as an undocumented person. And he said, you know, my family had to pay tons of money and fines and fees and spend years and years going through this very arduous process of like becoming legitimate citizens. And they did it, and we kind of feel robbed by going through that process if we just grant amnesty to people who come over and then we grant them. So even people who came illegally and then went through a process of becoming citizens feel like they're getting ripped off by a liberal open border. So it's a toxic issue across the board, and this was always going to be a toxic issue across the board. This is why so much of the hand wringing in 2016 never made sense, and I could tell it didn't make sense, and it didn't make sense for the very obvious reason. As long as you have neoliberalism and as long as you have imperialism, you're going to have a problem with immigration. You're going to have a problem with immigration. If you keep slapping sanctions on South American governments and overthrowing their governments and creating these dangerous hellscapes, then of course people are going to flee north, and of course you're going to have a big problem. And if you have an austerity model here at home where top 1% of income earners are hoarding 90% of the wealth, then that's going to create a fight for scraps where there's going to be resentment over immigration. Like, the status quo being what it is makes this problem unsolvable for an ostensibly left party. It's not unsolvable for a right party. They say, build a wall, close the border, fuck them. But if you want to be a left-wing party that actually believes in a more sort of equal model, then this is an unsolvable problem for you. And now we're seeing that proven. It's an unsolvable problem. There's nothing Biden can or cannot do between now and November to get on the right side of this issue.
Right. People don't leave their homes because they want to. They leave because they have to. Most people don't really move very far from where they grew up, even in this country. So for people to go to another country illegally with their family, where they have to work in an underground economy, how desperate do you have to be?
You have to walk through jungles of cartel-dominated strips of land that are basically ungoverned and ungovernable. I mean, it's extraordinarily dangerous on top of all that. So, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so who would do that unless they were desperate? So you want to stop immigration? Yes, as Keaton says, stop the imperialism. Stop destroying their countries. Stop destroying their economies, and they'll stop coming here. Not because not out of a hatred for America, but out of a love of home. Everybody loves their home.
Exactly.
Everybody wants to stay in their home unless the conditions are completely untenable. You're going to stay there. That having been said, this portrait that liberals paint of white people versus everyone else always falls apart when it meets real world issues. Who is most affected by unrestrained illegal immigration? People at the bottom of the economic ladder whose jobs are going to be taken by those immigrants, or the wages in those fields will be suppressed by the entry into those fields of people who will work for much less, jobs like construction, right, that are vulnerable to that. Now you go to a Home Depot parking lot, you got a bunch of guys hanging around waiting for day labor that would have gone to a contractor at one time. Those contractors are not all white guys.
Right.
A lot of them are Latino, a lot of them are black. When you look at polling, the people who are most against even legal immigration are black men. That makes sense. They are the most economically disenfranchised. So this is another place where Democrats have painted themselves into a no-win situation. It's not as simple as white people versus brown people. It's poor people afraid of their livelihoods and their ability to hang on by their fingernails.
Right. Exactly. And this is why I picked up on this 8 years ago, because under this model, and that's very important it's very important that I preface this point with under this model, because I think we need to change this model. But under this model, the Trump immigration policy is really the only one that makes sense. Now, if you want to change that, I do want to change that. But you can't change that without changing the model. You need to stop fucking with countries south of the border. And you need something like universal health care here so people don't feel they're getting as ripped off by the immigrant who comes in and gets benefits. Like, unless you fix those two things, the only policy that really makes any coherent sense as of now is Trump's. And I'm not saying that because I support Trump's policy. I'm saying that you can't change that policy unless you change those two overarching dynamics. And Hillary Clinton was not willing to do that. Therefore, her policy made no sense. Joe Biden's not willing to do that. Therefore, his policy makes no sense. Bernie's policy made sense back when before he ran for president. And then he opened it up. And, so it's, that's a situation where you really have to change the big thing before you can really take a stance on this issue. And you're seeing that right now. You're seeing there's no good option here. It's lose-lose.
Please clap.